Today we're going to be taking kind of a quantum leap forward here from what we've been doing so far. We're going to be using a full humanoid rig now that's going to be quite a bit more complicated than Squash and Stretch's rigs. And we're going to be creating a more complex and subtle movement, a walk cycle. Walk cycles are obviously very critical to learn and understand, and they're included in every book and almost every course about character animation. But you should be aware that walk cycles are really, really tough. They're also one of the most difficult things to do. And so we want to introduce you to the walk cycle and give you a really good foundation here. But be aware that this is going to be kind of a big leap forward for a lot of you. Now, the other thing about walk cycles is that they come into a category of movement, and we could sort of, crudely break down human and animal movement into roughly two categories. And one would be something like a walk cycle, which is a repetitive, oscillating movement with repeating parts. And in fact, a walk is particularly subtle in that it's got sort of multiple oscillating, repeating parts kind of layered on top of one another. And there are other movements like that, runs obviously, but a bird flying or a repetitive action like sawing wood or something like that. There's certainly activities that we as humans do that are very repetitive, and animals as well. However, most of the time, and maybe most is a strong word, but most of the time you're going to be dealing with movements that may have repetitive elements but are made up of strings of different motions. And if you think about just as you go through your daily life, you may walk a little bit, but you're going to maybe walk a few steps to the fridge, and then you're going to stop and open the fridge and lean down and look in and grab a carton of milk and look at the date on the back and close the fridge and go over to the sink and pour it out. So most of the time what we and other animals are doing, if you watch a squirrel gathering nuts, there's maybe some small repetitive behaviors. He picks up a nut and he does something repetitive for a while he eats it, but then he scuttles over and grabs another nut, and then he scuttles up the tree, and then he scuttles over the fence. And so most of the time, I think it's fair to say, we're not dealing with a continually cycling movement, except in the case of these specific things: walks, runs, dances, exercises, that kind of thing. And even those are often going to be sort of interspersed amongst more complex movements. So this is an instance, because a walk cycle is this kind of repetitive, oscillating movement, where you could actually build a walk cycle basically out of oscillating expressions. And School of Motion has a great tutorial that Joey did showing you how you can do that exact thing. For this course, we wanted to give you a little deeper understanding of the walk cycle and teach you a little more of a classical kind of a walk cycle that's more pose-to-pose based. Now, that doesn't mean that down the road you couldn't use things like expressions and other means to get your walk cycle to happen. But if you truly understand it at the pose level, at the kind of core level of the physics and the anatomy of the walk, then you're going to be able to use those kinds of tricks and things with a clear understanding of what your goal is and what you're trying to achieve. So we're going to do a pose-to-pose walk cycle here, and we're going to be also kind of not working chronologically, sort of first pose, second pose, third pose, which we did with the jump. But in this case, because there's so much repetition and so much oscillation back and forth, we're going to kind of jump around and build the key poses, kind of jumping back and forth. So let's dive in. We'll start with just a super fast tour of our rig here. Everything basically works the same. The hands and the feet all work the same, except Dolly and Ollie don't have thumbs, but they do have little kind of mitten fingers you can bend, just like Squash and Stretch did. They have eye controls that work exactly the same as Squash and Stretch's. They have the little blink and all that. The big difference here is in the cog, and we've now got a second control, a head control. So the cog works basically the same way. I click it and drag it, and it moves the center of gravity, the torso, and the head in this case. With Squash and Stretch, of course, their heads and their torsos were the same thing. But here now we have a clear torso and a head. So moving the cog does the same basic thing of moving that whole core of the body around. But now we also have a separate head control that can allow us to bend and control the head separately. It also allows us to actually move the position of the head a little bit, so we can kind of scrunch the head down if she's scared or sneaky or something like that. It allows you to kind of maybe crane the neck a little bit if you want a slightly extreme pose. So that gives you a whole lot of control right there. Now in the cog, we have a little row of controls. And down here at the bottom, we have the hip roll control. Now, I don't want you guys using this for this lesson. This is really a more advanced kind of control, and until you really understand the forces and anatomy at work, this is probably a little advanced. But I want to show you what it does and make you aware of it, because as you get further into character animation, the hip roll can be very critical. Especially if you're doing dances or very subtle kind of figurative movements or sports or that kind of thing. The hip roll allows you to have independent control of the rotation of the hips that's independent from anything else happening in the torso. That's, again, a very, very important thing for slightly more advanced animation. For this lesson, we are just going to keep this closed, and we are not going to use that. Please don't use this until you are good and ready. Okay, the next controls up the chain here create a kind of chain that actually starts with the rotation of the cog. So if I rotate the cog here back and forth, I'm rotating the whole torso. But I can also bend the torso itself. So I have a belly, chest, and neck rotation control here. So I can bend her at the belly, I can bend her at the waist to bend her chest, and I can bend her neck down. And then, of course, I can also bend her head. So that gives me the opportunity to do much more fluid torso movement. And just a quick little side note here, I think one of the greatest gifts that the puppet tool has given to us as After Effects character animators is the ability to deform torsos. Quite honestly, just a plain jointed limb worked okay, although I love having the puppet tool for limbs as well. But the ability to activate and make a torso deform was a huge, huge step forward for doing this kind of cutout animation, because it actually really makes it look a lot less cut out when there is some deformation in the torso. Even just a small amount of deformation in the torso will kind of soften and loosen up the whole movement. Oh, and that's actually true for all animation, honestly. Making sure that the torso is flexible and bends and twists. Of course, she can't twist, but she can bend. Twisting, bending torsos will make all of your character animation more fluid and dynamic. You don't want a stiff torso. In fact, most human movements and animal movements derive from the core of the body. Most derive directly from the hips and the pelvis. That's exactly why our big control, our center of gravity, is centered right in the hips and in the torso. And that's where most of our big motions are going to originate from. So we've built her torso here to reflect that. The driving force here is the cog, and then as we kind of move up the chain, belly, chest, neck, and then head, and we want to include the head in that chain generally, then we have kind of a rippling effect that happens. We bend the pelvis, then we bend the belly, then the chest, then the neck, then the head, and we're creating kind of a chain running through the body. That becomes really important when we start to in between this animation, because again, we need After Effects to do as much of our in-betweening work as we want, but we have to give it information going in that makes sense and relates to the anatomy of the figures that you're working with. So the way you set up your rigs, the way you set up your animation should be designed to reflect natural physiology and physics, so that when you hit the go button and tell After Effects to tween it, it does something at least close to what would naturally occur. And that's part of kind of the big idea that we're kind of working with these rigged puppets all the time. So let's go ahead and dive in and start creating our first pose. As always, I'm going to start with a Command A for select all. I'm going to hit the U key to open all of the keyframed attributes. Now when you're working on your own outside of this class, you're going to have to do this part yourself. I've done it for you. But what I've done here is I've keyframed at the neutral positions all of the attributes that we're going to use for this lesson. It is not all of the attributes, nor is it all of the attributes that you would use in every piece of animation, but it's the ones we're going to be focused on today. Now, when you do this on your own, what I recommend that you do is you basically keyframe all of the attributes that you know for sure you're going to use, and then maybe also activate the ones that you're pretty sure you're going to use. If, as you're proceeding through your animation, if you find out, uh-oh, I actually needed the shoulder control and I didn't put a keyframe at frame 0 for the shoulder control, what I would do in that instance is actually go back to 0, turn the keyframe on the shoulder control, set it to a hold keyframe, and then go back ahead again and begin to pose that attribute. You don't want to get forgetful about these kinds of basic procedures. You always want to work in a very orderly way, so you don't have any surprises or any secrets lurking in your animation that catch up to you later. I'm going to start by jumping ahead 10 frames, and we're going to start with the contact position. And as you recall from the PDF, this is the position where the frontmost foot has just made contact with the ground. Our weight is still on the backmost foot primarily, but the weight is about to be taken by the front foot, and the arms are swinging out in opposition to the legs. Also, the torso is going to be curled forward, and we're going to be giving the torso just a little bit of that curl forward. Now, as we work here, we're going to be dealing with a lot of technical stuff. That's the nature of the game. But we never want to forget our posing fundamentals. We never want to forget what our goal is here, which is to create a performance and a sense of life in the character. So try not to get overwhelmed by the technical and keep focusing on this figure. And we want to remember good silhouettes, strong lines of action, right? Balance, good balance, all of those basic things. We can't forget about them as we're kind of wrestling with the technology and wrestling with the rig. So again, we're going to start with that contact position. So I'm going to begin by bringing the cog down a little bit so we have some room to move her legs. And this is just a kind of an initial adjustment here. We'll adjust it more later. All right, with her cog lowered, now I have some room to move the feet a little bit. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add some guides here, because as we start playing around with the feet and building these poses, we need to be really clear about where the ground is. So right now the feet here are on the ground, and they're kind of delineating the plane at which the feet are intersecting with the ground here. And so I'm gonna hit a Command R here to get my rulers up, and I'm just gonna drop a couple little guides here. And I don't have to be like I don't have to be crazy. Oops, I got these locked here. I don't have to be like crazy accurate here. I'm only at a 1/4 resolution, and I'm just kind of eyeballing these, but we just want a kind of clear indication of what's underground and what's above ground in these planes here. So that's going to really help us. We want to make sure once we've set our guides that we do lock them. And also we do not want snap to guides checked. We want that unchecked. That's really important. Okay, so let's start by positioning the legs. Now let's talk a little bit about how we're going to do this. Notice that the feet are offset to give us this kind of illusion of a 3/4 kind of a turn. But we want to have these legs move at exactly the same distance. We want the right leg from the front to the back to move the same distance as the left leg front to back. Well, why is this? The reason for that is we're eventually going to put Dolly in a scene. This is the scene we're going to use here. And in this case, we're going to pan a background behind her. So when she's walking, as her feet are hitting the ground and dragging across the ground, we want to make sure that the pan speed of the background matches her feet. And we can adjust that pan speed. So we're going to just get her walking at whatever speed we want. But we want, as the feet hit the ground and then drag across, we want that distance on the right and the left foot to be exactly the same, so that all we have to do is find a single constant speed for the background, get it to match the speed that her feet are dragging across the ground, and then her feet will lock to the ground. It'll look like her feet are solidly hitting the ground and sticking as she walks across our panning background. This would also make it easier if you were actually dragging her across the background rather than keeping her still and panning a background behind her. Having even steps will also make that animation easier to get her to lock her feet down onto the ground. That has to be done kind of manually, but having the pace of the feet dragging across the floor be equidistant and the same speed, constant speed, is going to be really important to finishing up our scene. Now, in the case of a really expressive walk, like in particular a limp, let's say, you couldn't do this. In a limp, one leg isn't moving the same amount as the other leg. And in those cases, you would have to adjust the panning speed of your background to match what's happening with the feet, and it would take quite a bit of keyframing and fussing about, but that's certainly possible. But what we want here is a real kind of vanilla, neutral walk, really basic. And we want it to be kind of casual, kind of a casual stroll kind of a walk as she walks through the lab. So we don't want anything fancy here. We're going to go with a really straight, even, smooth stride. So I'm going to start by just clicking and dragging with the Shift key, just kind of dragging her feet out a little bit and just kind of get them out, kind of maybe just to the point where they're the knees are bent, or straight, excuse me, the knees are straight. And right away we want to bring the cog down a little bit to give us a little room to play here. And I'm going to maybe pull these out just a little bit more. And the back foot here, we want to lift up off the ground. And I don't want to lift it too much. Oh, there, I hit a nice round number, -40. Let's stick with that. Now, as we work here, we're going to because we're doing a lot of oscillating back and forth and repeating things, in many cases we're going to try to round numbers off. Now here I just kind of accidentally hit it, but it's good to kind of play around until you get the feeling you want. Oh, I like how that feels. And then kind of look at where you're at, and then just go ahead and type in the rounded off number, round it off by 5s or 10s. And that'll make copying and pasting, halving, reversing, remembering, all of those kind of things. It'll make that a lot easier as you work, since we're going to have to repeat lots of things. Like, for example, this foot is eventually going to be back here. We're going to have to lift this heel off the ground. Nice to keep those values the same so that her walk feels consistent. So minus 40 on that back foot, we're going to leave that there for now and try that. The front foot here, we're going to bend up so that her heel is just making contact with the ground. And we're going to also bend her toe back a little bit, because she's swinging and putting her leg down. We want a little bit of drag on that toe. We want that toe to be kind of dragging back a little as she puts this foot down. Okay, so now let's take a look at our values. Now the right foot here is at 596, very, very close to 600. And you'll notice, even just by kind of just playing around, on my own here without being precise, just kind of feeling it out, I've ended up very, very close to minus 600 on the left foot. So this makes our job easy. We can just round these numbers off, and we'll just go 600 on the back foot, and we'll go minus 600 on that front foot there. And now when we reverse this pose, we can just lock those same numbers right in, and then we know that even though these feet are offset, that they're going 600 clicks forward and 600 clicks back, a 1200 click stride. And that then will translate into a constant speed when we pan our background. So that's the reason why we want to be so precise in this case. And if we're not going to be able to be precise, because again we're doing a limp or some crazy thing like that, we still want to build in as much order here as we can, so that when we do make the adjustments, we don't have to make too many fussy adjustments. So for example, if I was doing a limp where one foot was dragging quite a bit farther, I would still make sure, if I can, if possible, and again, in some situations it won't be possible, but if possible, I want to try to have at least be equidistant from the neutral position forward to backward. If I can at least get that, then at least each stride is one constant speed. And then I'm only switching between two speeds with my panning. All right, so let's go ahead and get the cog position now and get her balance set a little better. We're going to start by dragging this forward a little bit so she's a little more kind of centered over these 2 points where the weight is. And then I want to bring her up. And part of what I'm trying to do too is I'm centering her here. Watch the knees. Notice how now I have one knee very bent, one very straight, now the opposite. So part of what I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to equal out the amount of bend in the knees, and I'm also trying to kind of center her weight a little better. So I'm kind of trying to accomplish those two tasks. And then I'm going to go ahead and use the nudge keys, and I'm just going to nudge her up and then nudge her back and forth until what I get is knees that are just one click basically away from bending. And I don't want them to lock. Notice how, boom, there the knee locked, and that front knee is locked. So there, the front knee locks right there, and the back knee locks right there. So I'm going to go forward just one more click. There, now they're both kind of locking right there. Okay, so I'm about 2 clicks away from those knees locking. So I'm going to come down 2 clicks from there. So there's my point where the knees lock. Click, click, just 2 clicks down. Now I've got just a little bit of flex in the knee. Not a ton, but just a little bit. Now that's going to work really nice. We could stretch these all the way out, But she's doing a relaxed walk. This is a kind of a calm, relaxed walk. She's not marching. She's not stomping. She's not an uptight character who's mad or anything like that. We're just strolling through the lab. So because of that, we don't want these legs to be completely locked. Also, you can potentially run into problems with your in-betweening if you unlock and lock the knees a lot. You want to kind of choose where you want to do this carefully, and just do it in sort of a controlled way. So that's looking pretty good, and we've got a little sort of, their legs are straight, but we've got that just little bit of relaxed bend there. Okay, our lower body now is looking pretty good. Let's look at the upper body and the torso. One of the things we want to do in this contact position is we want her back to arch a little bit, because she's kind of unfolding. She's opening up her step, she's opening up her arms, and we want her to kind of open up her torso and bend back a little bit. And when we go through the passing position, we're going to bend her forward a little bit and compress the torso a little bit. And we're going to create sort of a reversal between the contact position and the passing position with the bending of that torso. And that's going to give us a nice sense of kind of flex and spring and dynamics. Now, again, this is a vanilla walk. You can easily change some of these things I'm doing. Like, for example, if she was walking in a sad way, or she was searching for a clue on the ground, of course she would bend forward. But we're, again, just kind of doing a vanilla, neutral sort of walk. So I'm going to have her kind of arch her back just a little bit and kind of stretch back a little as she stretches out into her stride. So to start with, I'm going to bend her torso forward a little bit. Now you'll notice that's changed the equation that we worked so hard to get with her legs, but that's okay. We'll come back and tweak that in a little bit. And what I want to do is I want to create a kind of a soft curve here, and I want to kind of follow a line of action from this back leg, and we'll get that bend in that knee back in. So we have kind of a line of action that just curves right through the whole figure here. So I maybe need to curve her forward a little bit more, because I'm already kind of trying to pick up the line of this thigh moving up into the pelvis here. And then we're going to pull her back just a little bit on her belly, and we'll pull her back a little on the chest. We'll pull her neck back just a tad, and then just a little bit on the head here. Okay, and you'll notice that our values are actually coming out quite similar here. So I might go ahead and just make these all 5s. Let's try that. And just try to kind of make this orderly. And the cog rotation, let's kind of adjust by eyeball here. Okay, here now she feels like she's maybe leaning back a little bit too much. So let's just counter that just a little bit by rotating the cog a little. And again, the cog is ending up being really close to a round number here. Well, I liked it a little further, so let's go -12. Okay, and again, these numbers will just make it easier to kind of remember what we're doing, and it'll keep things sort of orderly as we work. Okay, now we want to kind of reset the position of the cog to regain those knee bends that we had before, those kind of equal knee bends. So I'm again just going to kind of use the nudge keys here, and we're just going to nudge her back until once again we get that kind of nice situation where both the legs are about a couple of clicks from locking knee. There we go. There's the knee lock right there, and we're just a couple clicks down from there. Okay, great. Now that's looking nice. We've got a nice sense of balance. She's got a little flex there on her body. That's looking good. Okay, now we want to position her arms. Now here we're going to do something a little bit different. We want her arms to be spread out forward and backward, and we want them opposing the legs. But we also are going to want, when we finish this animation, we're going to want her arms to swing easily back and forth. And again, this is a vanilla basic walk. So her arms are going to be just kind of swaying and swinging, almost like they're just loose with no muscle control at all, like loose noodles, basically. So because we want them to swing and we want a lot of overlap and follow through, we want a real flowing overlap and follow through feeling in those arms. Because of that, the IK choice is not going to be our best choice for animating these arms. As we looked at before, IK can sometimes make doing smooth overlap and follow through a little bit trickier. So this situation is a perfect situation to do the FK rather than the IK on the arms. Before we turn our IK off and switch to our FK, I want to talk really quick about the goal, because we haven't talked about this control yet and what it does. So let's just demonstrate this really quick. When you're using the IK system, you pretty much always want the goal on. And what the goal does is, as I pick up and move this arm around, it automatically bends the upper and lower arm, but the hand stays oriented to the hand controller. And if I want to rotate the hand, of course, I rotate the hand controller. Now that's the most intuitive way to work with the IK system, in my opinion, and there's very rare occasions where you wouldn't want it to work that way. So watch what happens when we turn the goal off. So I'm going to check the goal off, and notice that the hand just jumped and went straight. And now watch as I click and drag the IK controller around. Notice that the hand now orients itself to the forearm, not to the controller. So the hand is basically doing whatever the forearm does. Now again, for an IK, this is awkward. I'm counter keying with the controller for what the forearm is making my hand do. And now that's not a very controlled situation, and it can cause weird issues with in-betweening and all that kind of stuff. So again, for an IK system, you pretty much always want the goal on. Now this changes once we turn off the IK. So let's go ahead and turn off the IK. And notice that as soon as I turn off the IK, the arm goes perfectly straight, because it's now no longer being controlled by the position of the controller null here. It's just now a simple FK chain being controlled by its parent chain, shoulder to the chest, elbow to shoulder, wrist to elbow, and fingers to the hand. And so that's now what's controlling things, and we now use our upper, lower, and end FK controllers, as well as our finger controller to bend the fingers. But again, now we don't want the goal, because watch what happens with the goal on and with an FK system. As I move the arm, now the hand stays oriented straight down, even though I am bending the elbow. So once again, if I now bend the end FK to straighten that out, I'm counter keying for what's happening up here. And that's almost never a good idea, because again, it's going to mean weird issues with your in-betweens, and counter keying can introduce a lot of chaos into your animation. So what we want to do is we want to uncheck the goal now with the FK system, and now when I move that arm, it moves the way you think it would. Everything moves together in that simple FK parented chain. So IK on, goal on, IK off, goal off. That's the easy way to remember that. Now that we've seen how that goal works, and we've got our FK system working here, let's go ahead and pose this arm. So I'm going to pull the upper up a little bit here, and then we'll do the lower a little bit. And what I want to do is I want to swing this forward in a kind of natural curve here. So you can see I'm kind of trying to make a soft curve with that arm right up through the fingers. And then once again, I want to look at these values and maybe just round them off. The fingers are already at a nice round value, so let's pop this to 20 and 20 here just to make these nice and even, and then this one's right at 30. Okay, let's go ahead and do the back arm now. Now the back arm is a little tricky because it's way behind the body there, but I'll show you a little trick that makes this a little bit easier. So with the left hand, first off, again, we have to turn off the FK and turn off the goal, right? And then we want this one to swing out backwards. So it's going to be like right behind the torso here. But so I can see it, I'm going to sort of cheat a little first. So the first thing I'm going to do is actually just swing it out. And then we're going to make our nice little shape here. So I'm going to bend that lower and the upper and the fingers a little bit. Let's just round these off a little bit. The fingers can be minus 20. The upper FK we haven't actually done yet. Lower here can be minus 15, and this is a minus 20. And just rounding those values off a little bit. And now let's go ahead and put it back into place. Well, actually, now I look at it, it can maybe use just a little more curve. Let's maybe try minus 20 there too. Yeah, that's better. Okay, now let's go ahead and crank that back, and we'll put it back into position. And we want it to just kind of maybe peek out behind her body there just a little bit. No, I don't want it to go too far. Okay, there. Again, we want something that feels kind of natural and fairly casual. All right, oh, and there we got another nearly round value. Let's just round that off to 30. Okay, great, okay. So our first contact pose, also called the stride pose. Some people call this the stride for obvious reasons, but I'm gonna keep referring to it as contact. So now we've got our first contact pose made. We wanna now duplicate this and reverse the legs. So I'm going to jump ahead 20 here. And here we're going to basically just duplicate the pose. And I'm going to do this really easily by just selecting all the keyframes here. And we'll just hit the add keyframe button, and that'll duplicate all the keyframes for this pose. And we're basically going to keep the torso just as it is, but we're going to swap out the legs and we're going to swap the arms out. So let's start with the legs because we have some numerics here that can make this easy for us. So remember, we're going 600 and 600. So the left foot here is going to go from minus 600 to plus 600. And the toe roll is going to flatten and the controller is going to flatten down to the ground. And we're going to pick our heel roll up, the same value as our other foot here, minus 40. So we can go ahead and just type minus 40 in there. That'll save us some time. Whoops, wrong value, minus 40. There we go. Now the right foot here, that's going to come forward to minus 600. And again, we're going to flatten the foot down. We're going to flatten that heel roll. And now we're going to tilt it up until, again, we get that heel making contact with the ground. And then we're going to pull that toe back and get that little flex on the toe. Okay, nice. All right, now this is looking good. In fact, her balance actually doesn't look too bad. But notice again that we have a very, very straight leg and a very, very bent leg. And just like we did with the other pose, we want to kind of even these out. So we're going to use that nudging trick, and I'm going to start by nudging with the shift key down to kind of jump me forward because I got to get quite a ways here. Okay. All right, look, now we're one frame off here. So if I nudge down one click, that knee bends. Second click, that knee bends. Let's try to get them to both bend at exactly the same time. There we go. Okay, so now we've got that kind of equal tension on the front and back leg. And so now I want to come down 1-2 clicks from where that knee locks, just like we did before. Now she feels maybe just a little bit far forward here, so I'm just going to tilt her back just a tiny bit. And again, I'm going to nudge her back a little to even those out. 1, 2. 1, 2. Okay. That's looking nice. All right. Now her feet are in position. We need to reverse the arms. So we're going to do kind of the same thing we did before. We'll just reverse these, and now we're going to create kind of the opposite bend. Now you don't want to bend this one back too much, because that's what we call breaking a joint. We're kind of bending it against the sort of natural way it will bend, but we want to exaggerate as well. Exaggeration is important too, and sometimes breaking joints is important to create a fluid overlap and follow through. So we're going to break this elbow just a little, not a ton, but just a little bit. Then we can do a little bit more with the wrist here, because that can bend back, and the fingers. So again, we're trying to create a smooth curve, a smooth flow, and maybe not quite so much there. All right, and then let's do the back arm here. That one's now going to swing out, again opposing the legs. A little more on the wrist and the hand. Okay, let's round some values off here just to clean this up a little bit. Oops, and I didn't round off the other ones. Let's do those too. Minus 15, minus 20. Let's do minus 15 on that. Let's just pump that a little bit more. And then let's see if we can get away with minus 50. Well, that's a lot. There we go. Okay, that's looking nice. She's got a nice sense of balance there. It's working good. Okay. So now switching between our two poses, you can see we basically have the same pose, but just on opposing legs. All right, great. Okay, now we're going to create our passing positions. And this is, from a certain point of view, a kind of an in-between these two extremes, with the legs at their most extreme position. The passing position is, in a sense, a kind of a breakdown, we might call it. A breakdown is the term used by traditional animators to mean the first critical in-between between two very, very broad extremes. Now, most of the time, breakdown drawings become key poses themselves because they have to be shaped and finessed so much. But there is a certain amount of in-betweening that's happening here between these two things. So we're going to start by actually resetting to neutral here in order to build this pose, because part of what's important about this pose is that on this passing position, one of the legs, whichever leg is coming through, is going to be fully straight underneath the body and fully supporting the weight of the body, while the second leg swings through, passes by. So we want to start with the neutral because it has our feet on the ground. They're in their zero positions in terms of sliding back and forth. The legs are straight and the body is relatively balanced, although once we lift up one foot, we'll have to adjust the balance a little. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to jump ahead 10 frames, and I'm going to copy and paste the neutrals back in here. Oops, we actually need all of these, so I'm just going to grab them all. You can see by now we've used almost every attribute, but we'll use more. Okay, so we've got her back into her neutral, and let's pay attention to which foot is which here. It's easy to get confused when you're doing this, so don't forget to kind of flip back and forth using your J and K key between your key poses, so you kind of remember what's coming from where and where it's going to. So the left leg here is the one that's coming back, so that's the one that's going to stay on the ground, and the right leg is the one that's going to be picking up and passing by. Okay, So let's go ahead and pick up that foot, and I'm going to bend it down so it's kind of relaxed and dangling. And I'm going to droop the toe as well because this is swinging forward. So we want the heel and the toe to be dragging as this is swinging forward, but we want it to be fairly relaxed. Now the other thing that we want is we want to make sure that the toe isn't punching through the ground, but we also don't want to lift the foot too high. When we walk, human beings are lazy by nature, and we usually are trying to conserve energy. So if you're just doing a casual strolling walk, you are not going to lift your foot way up here. You're only going to do that if you're marching or stomping or angry or jumping over or the sidewalk is hot, or you're jumping over a puddle or something. You're not going to lift your knee very high. In fact, you're barely going to clear the ground. So you want to be just above the ground and not really a whole lot more than that for sort of a casual walk. Okay. We also want to look at the silhouette we're creating, and usually because her pants colors are the same, it tends to look a little neater if you don't leave these little holes. So I like to go ahead and close those off a little bit, and then you want to create a nice silhouette on the back here with the position of the foot. Okay, so that's looking good. Now let's set her cog here, and here we want her to curl forward a little bit. We want her to kind of curl forward. So I'm going to bend her cog back a little, and then we're going to curl her forward a little. And remember, we did 5s before, so maybe let's just try the same thing. Let's just type all -5s in. That worked pretty good, and yeah, that looks nice. And then we'll bend her back a little to get that weight a little straighter. Now we also want to push her forward because she's not actually over her foot there. So let's move that whole cog. Whoops, I got the W held down. Let's grab the shift key and just slide her forward until that weight is a little more centered over that leg there. Oops, and then now she looks like she's actually leaning a little too far forward. There we go. That's looking good. And then we want to lower her enough so that that back leg, excuse me, isn't fully taut and isn't stretched out. So I'm going to start nudging down, excuse me, and I'm going to nudge, boom, until that knee pops right there. And I'm going to go once again, I'm going to go 2 clicks past that knee starting to bend. 1, 2, to give her just kind of a bit of a relaxed posture. So her leg is straight under her, but it's not lock-kneed. We don't have a perfectly locked knee. All right, that's looking nice. Okay, let's go ahead and pose the arms. Now, I did a quick copy and paste to neutral here, but one of the things I did is I copied our IKFK back on, and we actually are going to leave that off this whole time. So I'm actually going to delete both of these keyframes here, and I'm going to take this FK-IK switch, and I'm just going to slide it back here. So it's just no longer in our equation of copying and pasting and doing all that kind of stuff. And we'll do the same thing down here. So we'll just pull those out. Now for most things, you're not going to want to do this. You want it in all the keyframes in line with your key poses. But because we know we're using only FK for this whole thing, we can just kind of slide those back, and then we can focus on on the attributes we really need to create the animation. Oh, and let's also really quick, let's also pose her eyes a little. Let's go back to this first pose here, and let's just move her eyes forward a little because she's walking forward. We want her to look where she's going, unless she's a spokes character who's like addressing the camera. And this one, because I don't have any other keyframes here and we're not going to do anything else with her eyes, this one I'm just going to go ahead and close that and lock it because we really don't need to do anything else with that at all. Okay, back to the arms now here on our passing position. You can see in a sense they're already sort of work because they're kind of in the middle of these swings at their 0 position. We want to give them a little shape to help our overlap and follow through that we're going to add later on. So on this pose here, you want to think about what's happening with these arms. The front arm here, the right arm, is swinging back. So as it swings back, the lower parts of the arm are going to continue to drag. In fact, the whole arm is going to drag a little bit as this swings back. So right here we want to give just a little bit, not so much to the shoulder, a little more to the lower, and then we can do more with the wrist and fingers because they're a little looser, so they're hanging a little, dangling a little more loosely. And again, I want to create a soft curve here. So now you can see as we go from here to here, the hand is dragging and the arm is dragging back, and then it flips out here when we get to this pose here. So we'll have this nice little reversal here, and there's another reversal for you, bent this way, and that's gonna really help accentuate that overlap and follow through. So let's do the same with the back arm here with the left arm. So we're gonna point this one back just a little, and again I'm gonna cheat. I'm gonna pull this out first, and then we're gonna, oh, we still have the goal on. Oh shoot, that means we posed. Oh, let's see, we forgot to delete the goal. That's what we forgot to do. We did that with the IK, but we forgot to delete the goal. So let's do that as well. Let's take out these and slide that back. Almost forgot about our goal. Okay, that's just the kind of chaos we don't want. All right, there you go. And anytime you find a mistake, oh my God, fix it right away. Do not wait. Do not think, oh, I'll fix that later. Never, never, never say that, especially when you're animating characters. Fix it right away. Okay, now that we've got that goal off, this will pose more correctly. So again, I'm pulling it out from the body just so I can see what's happening. And I'm going to bend that wrist, and I'm going to bend those fingers. And now we can basically put the arm back. Now I'm not going to worry about evening out any values here because I don't need to smooth those out so much here. Okay, so now you can see this back arm as it swings forward is also now dragging, and then pop, it swings out in this pose. All right, so there's our passing position. That's looking pretty nice. Now, the next thing I want to do is, just like we did with the contact position, I want to duplicate the passing position, but reverse the feet and the arms. So let's go ahead and jump forward 10 frames. And now we're going to copy and paste the keyframes for the old passing position. And just to save time, I just do them all, even though we're going to change things. I just pop them all in, and then we're at least mostly there. Okay, and then now we need to reverse the feet. So first off, the right foot needs to come back down the ground. So we're going to go ahead and zero out the position values, and we're going to zero out the controller rotation and zero out the toe roll to pop that guy back on the ground. And then the back foot is now the one that's going to lift up off the ground. We're going to rotate it back so it drags as it swings forward, and we're going to angle the toe again so that drag swinging forward. And this has to be high enough to clear that back line there, but again, not much higher. We don't want to swing out too high for a simple walk. Okay. All right, that's looking good. And then I want to pull her weight back now, back a little bit, so it's over that foot a little bit better. That looks good. And then once again, we're going to go to the point that the knee locks, and then 2 nudge clicks down from that point. So we have a nearly straight leg, but just a little bit of bend in that leg. Next thing we need to do is reverse the arms. And this will be easy. We can just kind of make the same curve back. And remember, again, the reason we're doing this is because now the arm is swinging forward. So it's going to drag back and it's going to hold the same curve shape coming forward. So here we want to basically just do everything opposite. It's opposite time here. And again, we're creating another reversal. Okay. Here we go. And see how that's actually kind of sticking the hand there in place? That's probably going to look a little bit awkward in animation, so I'm going to pull that forward just a little bit more. There we go. In fact, it is supposed to be the middle position, so maybe we should bring it in quite a bit. There we go. Oops. So watch this arm now as it drags back, kicks out with the overlapping action, and then starts to drag forward again. See how that's working? Boom, boom, boom. All right. Now the back arm, we want to do the same thing with the back arm here. We want to basically reverse that. So the upper is probably pretty good. Not much change there. Whoops. The lower end. And then those fingers. And then let's just tuck that in just a little bit more as well. Okay, and again, think about your silhouette. Having a little bit of that finger pop out on her side there will help communicate what's happening with this pose and keep the clarity so we know that that's the fingers there. Okay, there. Now you can see both those arms are dragging as they come back. All right, cool. Now we need to duplicate our first key pose forward here in order to create our loop. But before we do that, let's go ahead and block any remaining keyframes that we're missing here, and we're missing a few. Pretty much all just on this very, very first key pose. So I'm just going to grab all of our keyframes. We'll just look for those little holes. Oops. So I'm just going to select all of my keyframes. I'm just going to look for any of these little holes and just fill them in by hitting the Add Keyframe button. And then let's just go through and just double check and make sure we haven't missed any here. Okay, no, that looks good. Now we're ready to jump ahead 10 frames and copy and paste that first pose forward to create our loop. All right, great. Okay, now that we've got our basic extremes done here, our basic key poses, we're ready to do the next set of breakdowns that will become our next set of key poses. And the next set of key poses is really critical for getting a sense of weight to our character. Let's RAM preview now and kind of see where we're at. So I'm going to go back to the first key pose, hit that B key, I'm going to go to the end one, hit the end key, and then tuck that in by 1 frame, and then we'll RAM preview. And you can see she's starting to walk pretty good. In fact, it's already feeling like a walk. And we can feel the swing of those arms. We can feel the feet alternating, picking her up and putting her down as she takes each step. But we're still not getting a real sense of weight. If we were just to leave the walk like this, it would be okay, but it wouldn't really give us a sense that Dolly has any real physicality or any weight. So our next set of key poses are going to give us that feeling. But the thing about the next set of key poses is they really truly are breakdowns in that they are maybe 80%, maybe 90% simply a straight in between from one pose to the next. Okay, so what we're going to do, because so much of these next poses are just in-betweens, we're going to go ahead and let After Effects assist us and create most of the key frames for this key pose for us, and then we're just going to go in and modify what's there. Okay, so to do that, I'm going to select all of the keyframes in my current cycle, and I'm going to hold down the Command key and I'm going to turn them into just standard interpolated keyframes with no eases. And I'm going to start going by fives. I'm going to go right in between each of these, and I'm just going to hit, with them all selected still, I'm just going to hit the add keyframe button, and we're going to jump ahead 5 again and add the keyframe button. And I have so few frames here, I can probably just eyeball this. 5 in between there and in between there. Okay, so now I have all of my key poses keyframe. They just need to be modified now. So I'm going to reselect all of those and Command Option click. Now in the case of a walk cycle in particular, we're going to end up pulling out a lot of these keyframes, quite frankly. But this is still the very best method to use, in my opinion, to work quickly and efficiently, and also to work in a way that revision and timing and adjusting timing and revising is easy and doesn't give you a lot of headaches. Once we pull keyframes out and finesse and do all the stuff we do when we tween and finish, it's going to get harder and harder and harder and harder to revise. Whereas this blocked in hold keyframe system for each pose is very easy to revise, because each column is a completely self-contained unit containing every attribute needed to make this pose work, okay, regardless of what's coming before or what's coming after. And that's kind of the secret here. But I just want to warn you ahead of time that a lot of these keyframes are going to disappear by the end of our process, but that's okay. They're helping us now, okay? So, and I think as you move through the process, you'll see how that continues to work. The first pose we're going to do is the one right after the contact position. And in this pose, this is very critical, because this is the pose where the weight shifts from the back foot to the front foot. So right now, most of the weight is on the back foot. The front foot is about to take the weight. And by the time we get to this pose here, the weight is fully on this back foot. But on this pose, we have to show that the weight is on this foot. So the first thing that we want to do is flatten this foot out, because you wouldn't want to take weight on the edge of your heel like this. That would be absurd and awkward, and you'd probably break your ankle. So the first thing we're going to do is take this foot and we're going to flatten it back down to the ground. So I'm going to flatten the heel roll, and I'm going to flatten the rotation to drop that back down to the ground. Okay. So now you can see that the foot drops down, so now it's ready to take some weight from us. Boom. Okay? Now the next thing we're going to do is drop the cog, and we're going to drop it way down here, because we want her to come down hard on that weight. We also want her to come forward, because now the weight is on that front foot primarily. So we're going to have her come quite a bit forward here. Boom. And you can feel that compression as that knee bends and that weight comes down on that foot. That's really, really critical there. Okay. Now the torso and the arms, we can just leave those, because they're just tweening smoothly and correctly the way we want them to. So we really don't have to do anything with the upper part of the body. But we do want to fix the back foot a little bit as well. With the back foot here, we want to make sure that it is dragging behind as it's been pushed off the back here. So it's not quite to the passing position, but we kind of want it to begin to have that kind of a shape where it's dragging behind. So I'm just going to lift this guy up a little bit, and then we're going to pull that heel back, and we're going to bend that toe back, and we're going to make sure it's not poking through the ground. There we go. And then coming through. Okay? All right. So we've got our feet position. We've brought our cog down and forward quite a bit there. And we're ready to move on to our passing position here. We've got that all done already. Now let's go to the next pose in our sequence, and this one's really critical. This pose here, and it doesn't look like much right now, this pose is where she needs to lift her body weight and push it forward, up and forward, so that the foot that's swinging forward can then pick up the weight as it's dropped down to start the next step. So with this pose, this foot that's on the ground back here needs to push up and push her up high in the air, as high as we can go, as a matter of fact. So what I'm going to do here is just take her cog, and I'm just going to click it up until that back foot actually does stretch out. Now I don't want to stretch out too far, so I'm going to click back down. I use the shift key to jump a big increment, but I'm going to come down to where that knee bends. There's that knee bend right there, and then the knee locks right here. So I'm going to go to the lock position, and then I'm going to go 2 clicks beyond that. So I stretch on that leg a little bit. Now our limbs all stretch, so I mean I could do this. But if I do this, now she no longer has the same proportion. I would maybe use that if I was doing it super fast in a single key, a single frame that was going to snap to something in a big broad cartoony moment. But in our key poses, a little bit of stretch is okay, but we don't want to stretch more than a couple clicks from that point where the knee bends, because we don't want her essential proportions to change. She shouldn't have a longer leg. She just has a slightly stretched out leg on this pose. Okay? So there we go. Now she's lifting up a little bit there, but I want her to lift up some more. She's not really lifting up very much. So partly what I want to do here is pull her back on this foot a little bit. First of all, so the weight is a little more centered over that foot as she pushes up, but it's also going to allow me to cheat her up a little higher. So let's scooch her back a little bit, and you see as I scooch her back a little, that knee bends more, and now I have a little more room to raise her up in the air. And again, I'm going to look for that knee to straighten and then just go a couple clicks beyond that. So now let's see. Okay, good. We're getting a little more lift there. It's still not a lot, so I'm going to cheat her back just a little bit more. 1, 2. There, that's better. We're not getting a huge lift there, but the important thing is that we feel that little bit of lift in her torso and her head up there, so that as she pushes the weight forward, we feel it pushing up, forward, and then we'll feel it drop down on the other side. Okay, that's looking good. Now with the foot coming through here, we just want to pull that up a little bit, and we just want to add just a little bit more drag on this. It's still not ready to flip forward quite so much. So I'm just going to pull that down and just let that drag, because again, that leg is swinging forward. A little hard to tell here. It looks like the legs are just, because of the color of the pants there, it looks like they're just swapping, but pay close attention. The right foot is swinging forward, so we still want that toe to drag a little bit. Okay, so there's our kind of lift position, right? Okay, so we have our contact position, our down position, our passing position, our lift or up position. Then we go to our next contact position, and then we want to repeat what we did before with the down position here. So now we want, once again, to flatten, we want to flatten our foot down to the ground, and we want to lower that cog, and here we're going to come down even just a little bit farther, because this leg is a little bit longer. Or maybe we want to come down, yeah, we want to come down just a little bit farther. Okay. And what I want to do is I want to kind of look at the position here that we have on this key, and we're going to kind of compare it to the other down position and make sure they have a similar feeling. So here's our down position we're working on here. Our other one is right over here. Yeah, and there we go. We're definitely getting a similar feeling and a same amount of compression in the body. And then let's compare it with the previous pose. Boom, there she goes. Boom, comes down and takes that weight. Boom, good. All right, that's looking good. The back foot here, once again, we need to raise that up a little bit, and then we want that ankle to drag and that toe to drag. But we want to pull that up so it clears the floor. Good. Great, that's looking good. Okay, and again, we don't really have to do anything else with the upper part of the body. We're just going to let After Effects tween all that stuff. Okay, great. All right, now we have our next passing position, which is good. And then again, here we have that lift position, that up position that we want to create. So again, we're going to grab the cog, and we're going to crank her up till that foot goes straight. And then again, let's compare it to the previous. Yeah, I see we're barely getting up at all, so we want to pull her back again. And then that'll give us the opportunity to stretch her back up. And I'm going to go 2 clicks beyond that stretch point. There, we're getting a little bit of lift. Still not a lot. Let's clunk her back a couple more clicks here. 1, 2. Nope, can't get much higher than that. Okay, so because I can't get much higher than that without kind of radically distorting this pose, what we're going to do is we're just going to cheat this pose down just a couple clicks. Just a little bit. And then we should get just a little better feeling of lift here. There we go, that's helping a little bit, just a little more of that lift. And again, every puppet's going to be different, and every animation's going to be a little bit different. The combination of attributes and things is always going to create slightly different situations. So with some characters, with some poses, you might be able to get a big, giant lift. With others, you might not get such a big lift. It depends. But we want to get as much as we can to feel that she's pushing up and forward there. Okay? The front foot, again, we're just going to raise that a teeny bit. And we're going to, once again, give this a sense of drag. But we don't want it to punch through the floor there. So I'm going to lift this up even just a little bit more because we don't want it to go through the ground plane. But we still want it to be dragging through before it flips up on our last key pose there. All right, very cool. All right, so we've now got all of our key poses made. Let's go ahead and do a RAM preview and see what we've got. All right, very nice. Okay, you can feel that sense of weight as she lifts herself and then drops the weight on each foot in turn. Drop, 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 lift, drop, lift, drop, lift, drop. Okay, right now we've got a key pose every 5 frames, but she looks a little slow to me, so I'm just gonna adjust our timing right now. And this is again the reason why working this way is a good way to work, because we can make this adjustment fairly easily with these nice big blocks of keyframes. Now the one thing we want to make sure of is that we are always selecting all of the keyframes from top to bottom, or from bottom to top. Oops. Whoopsie. Getting a little bit of lag here because of the recording. Things are moving a little slow. So just crunch all these down by a single frame. That should give us a little, oopsie, should give us a little bit of a sprightlier movement. A little jauntier, whoopsie. Lag is killing me there. All right. And we'll get to the end of that keyframe, hit the end key, and then just tuck that in by 1 frame. And then let's RAM preview again. Oh yeah, that's a much nicer speed. That feels a little more natural, a little more like she's just going for a easy stroll. Okay, great. All right, let's go ahead and have a look at Dolly in her environment. Now, in the next lesson, we're going to in between and finesse this and smooth this all out. But for right now, we're just going to create a simple little key test. So let's go to the Dolly Walk render comp here, and I'm actually going to switch to standard view while we do this, so we can see what we're doing just a little bit better. Now this comp is set up for you guys with an automatically panning background. So let's just RAM preview this and just see what we have here. So you can see that if we just run the animation, oops, and I've got it on full resolution, no wonder this is running so slow. Okay, so you can see that as this RAM previews that we've got a continuously panning background. There it goes. And that Dolly is not exactly walking because we only have one cycle of her of her walk in there. So the first thing we want to do is we want to get Dolly walking continuously through the scene, so she's continuously walking all the way along. And to do that, we're going to use time remapping and a loop out expression. Now, if you're not familiar with using expressions, this is a real simple one. I would recommend that you do some basic expression tutorials or go through some of Adobe's documentation on expressions if you want to learn the basics of expressions. I'm just going to do this really quick, simple one for you guys and walk you guys through it. It's an easy one that you can use. But we're not going to take the time to go deeply into how expressions work. But essentially an expression is a little piece of code that you can attach to an attribute to get different kinds of actions and behaviors and reactions to other layers and other attributes. Okay, the first thing we're going to do is add time remapping. If you haven't used time remapping before, time remapping allows you to take a pre-composed layer, and what you can do is you can add the time remap, and then you can use keyframes to access different times within the timeline inside this pre-comp. So in other words, this timeline here will now be run independent, and we can use keyframes to access exactly the time in the timeline in the Dolly rig comp that we want, in particular her walk cycle. So let's go ahead and add the time remap, and we'll stick the time remap on there. And when you do that, it immediately adds two keyframes. Now the second one we can't see because Dolly's pre-comp is very, very long. So in our render comp here is only 7 seconds. So her second keyframe is way out at 30 seconds somewhere. And the first keyframe is here set to 0, 0, which is where we are in this timeline. So right now, the timeline that we're in and the timeline in her pre-comp are in sync. But what I can do now is I can now grab keyframes or set keyframes or move keyframes around that will allow me to play back any one of the frames in her comp. Like, for example, 3 seconds, 10 frames. I can play that, or I can play any section of that timeline that I want. So this is super handy for character animation. We use it both in compositions like this. We also use it in rigging quite a bit. So with this time remap set, what I want to do is I want to grab keyframes for the beginning and the end of her little walk key test here. Let's go back to the Dolly rig, and we're going to jump ahead to the first key pose in her cycle. We're going to go back to the render comp and then grab a keyframe on the time remap for that point. Then we're going to go back to the Dolly rig. We're going to go to the end, the last frame of her cycle. Now I can go back to the render comp, and we can add a keyframe right there at the end of her cycle. Now we have to get rid of the original two keyframes here, the one that's way out here at 30 seconds and the one that's right here, because the looping expression is just going to be looking for two keyframes to cycle between, not 4. So To get rid of the one that's way out here that's beyond our timeline, we're going to use the keyframe navigation button here and just jump to that keyframe way out at 30 seconds, and then I can use the add or remove keyframe button to get rid of that, and then I can jump back to come back to our scene here, and then I just need to delete the first keyframe there that the time remap set. So now we just have the 2 keyframes for the walk cycle. Okay, so now we can click and drag our keyframes back, so we are starting at frame 0, and then we're going to add our loop out expression. Now if you're not used to working with expressions, this is an easy one because we can just use the pull down menu for this. So I'm not going to get way into a big explanation of expressions. I'm just going to show you this nice simple trick to get this to work. So you hold down the Option key and you click on the stopwatch. That activates the expression window. And then you just have this little pull down here. You see this little circle with a little diamond on it. I can activate that, and it has all these expressions I can use. And I'm going to go down to Property, and I want loop out right there. And it's got a bunch of other stuff. We don't even have to worry about any of this stuff. It's going to do just what we want it to do. Loop out. And what loop out's going to do is it's now going to take these 2 keyframes, and it's going to go from this keyframe to this keyframe, and then immediately jump back to this keyframe and go to this keyframe again, and back to this one, and again and again and again. So we're going to get a nice looping cycle. Let's do a RAM preview, and now we'll see that Dolly walks all the way through the scene continuously. All right, fun. Now let's adjust the speed of the pan a little bit so that her feet and the speed of her steps match with the speed of the pan. Right now they don't quite match. It looks to me like the background is moving a little too quickly for the speed that she's walking. Now I've given you guys a nice little setup here. I've created a simple little rig for this background so that if you click on the null here called panning speed, you'll see we have a little slider that just allows you to speed up or slow down the background pan however you need it to. This way, whatever kind of walk or even run you create, you can adjust the speed for the background to get it to match. Now, because this is just a key test, we don't need to get super anal about this yet. We can adjust more finely once we get to the final animation and it's tweened and finessed. But we can get pretty close here. So what I want to look for is I want to look for a spot where one of these feet kind of come down near one of these marks on the ground. Oh, there, that's pretty good. Okay, there. The heel comes down and the heel is lined up with this straight line here. So that's a pretty good indicator. So I'm going to go forward here until that foot is all the way back in its furthest position, which is about right there. Okay. And then now I'm just going to adjust my speed here. I'm going to slow this down until that line matches up with that heel again. Now again, because this is just a key test, there is basically no way you're going to get this perfect. It's almost impossible. So you're just going to kind of do a little bit of a guesstimation here. You see right away that speed matches a little more closely and feels a little more like the speed that she should be going. In fact, it still looks maybe a little bit fast. Let's maybe slow it down just an inch more and see if that feels a little bit better. And again, we'll adjust this exactly once we get the in-betweening done. This is totally sufficient for a little key test here, and this is exactly what you're going to create for me for your exercise. So you have 2 choices again here. You can either jump forward to the exercise and watch that and begin working on your exercise, which will be to create a key test for Ollie. Or you can do the bonus lesson, and in the bonus lesson we'll look at creating a run cycle, and we'll create the key poses and a key test for a simple run cycle.
Whoa.